Hey mappers and non-mappers, and welcome to the second part of the displacement tutorial. Advanced. Alrighty then, welcome to part 2 of the Displacements tutorial. We're really getting into the big leagues now, ladies and gents. Before we get into it, I wanted to recontextualize something that I'd said in the first tutorial. Now, if you haven't seen the first part, a link for the video will be found in the description below. So in the first Displacements video, I talked about the mindset that one has to be in when working with displacements. And for this video, I want to add an analogy to that. Working with brushes is a lot like carpenting, while working with a displacement is a lot like blacksmithing. See, with woodworking, all you can really do is reduce. You can cut wood, you can shave wood, you can shape wood. You can't change the original geometric shape that the wood piece was when you started. Meanwhile, with blacksmithing, you get a hunk of metal, just a cube of metal, you get it red hot, you start hitting away at it, and suddenly you can get a ball, you can get a flat sheet, you can turn that piece of metal into whatever shape you want while keeping the same amount of mass. This is what I mean by displacement working is very malleable. When you make mistakes, you can just go back to the original shape. If you have a square of displacement and you want to turn it into a bulb, if you want to turn it into a sphere even, it is totally possible. Difficult, there are much easier ways to make spheres than from a single plane, but you can move the mesh around into whatever shape you want it to be. Another cameo from the original video was, of course, the displacement cube. Now, in the video, I showed you how to make it, but I realized I didn't actually explain how it should be used. So if we bring this guy closer, you'll see that using the displacement face edit sheet, I am now able, let me make the radius a little larger so you can see it. This arrow controls in which direction the displacement moves. When I hold Alt and the right click button, and I press on one of these faces, you see the arrow changes based off which face I've clicked on. Whoops. So say I want it to be going in the western direction. I right click on this white piece, and now it's going in the western direction. I want it to go north, click on this, it goes in the north direction. Now this becomes very useful for getting the correct orientation of your natural terrain. Say here I have a riverbed. Now let's very quickly make this riverbed look a little more natural. So we go in with our edit, and for this I'm just going to use the upward arrow, should work well enough. And we will just smooth out all of the creases we have. And it'll smooth the bed. You see I created this kind of brushed riverbed. But of course with the smoothing tool, it's now flattened a bit. So I can of course come back in to raise lower and give it different parts that are more shallow maybe. Some parts that are more deep. Raise the height here a little bit more. Come in with the smooth tool because it's very good to have smooth, walkable terrain in Team Fortress. We have a very simple, but very elegant riverbed here. But of course, maybe you don't want the riverbed to just be a straight line as it is right now. So we go in and we set this to a much higher radius, say 600 or so. No, maybe 500. And we right click on here. Actually, let me set this a little higher. And now we can move, oh, sorry, wrong tool. We can move the riverbed in a more S curve. And it'll keep its riverbed, but now have a cool dynamic feeling to it. Now, of course, a riverbed isn't a riverbed without the water. And I really like to use these two textures the waterfall, specifically the waterfall solid, because it's somewhat translucent. If I go in, I can create, let's say, a water system right here, have it go all the way through. And of course, for now, the waterfall doesn't follow the rest of the displacement. Let me make this a bit larger. And then I create this into a displacement as well. Go in with the same displacement tool and have the water bend with the riverbed I just made. And look at that. A true blue riverbed. Little steep on this side. We can fix that with an easy smooth. Let me just touch the top. Alt right click. Make the radius a little smaller. Maybe a little bigger. Smooth it out with some taps here and there. And there we go. A very natural looking riverbed. And one more thing you can do in the displacement editor is you can go to these attributes here. Now, say this were inside the level and you wanted people to be able to put their feet inside the water, or maybe when they die, their ragdoll goes under the water. You can make sure that all of these are clicked. So the physics collision will mean that a ragdoll or a person will go through this plane as if it had no collision, and the hull and the ray respond to the bullets and the rockets. So it would look a little awkward if I shot a rocket and it hit the water and exploded without going further down onto the riverbed. So I just turn off that ray and hull collision, and now things will go through the water as they should. As you can see in this medieval map that I've been working on, I have a very intense river flow happening here using the exact same methods that I showed you. And if I were to fall into this death pit, my body goes under the water. Perfect. Exactly what I was looking for. Also worth pointing out in that medieval map was the cliff with the waterfall on it at the very beginning there. So if I took this rock wall texture and I set it up at the end, set the texture to a larger scale. It's always very beneficial, to set the texture to a larger scale, especially with caves and cliffs, because these textures tile very obviously the larger your organic structure is. And I'm also going to come in here and cut this big block up into smaller pieces, because the smaller the original brush is, the more control you'll have over how the displacement tools affect its shape. So I'm going to come in here now, and I'm just going to create a displacement out of each of these faces. Remember, we don't see the back, so I didn't do the back or the bottom, but I kept the top just in case that's visible. First thing I'm going to try, which I'll do a bigger lesson on this later in the episode, but I like to come in and just press the subdivide button to see how it affects the terrain. And so far this doesn't look too bad, so I think I will go with this. So now I have this rounded subdivided waterfall structure here, but it's not very natural looking. So using this displacement cube here, I'm going to come in, and I've always found that it's good to have very wide bases, because of course the support of the actual structure itself would be larger on the bottom, and it builds up to be a bit smaller on the top. Now I can come in here at a 45-degree angle with the smoothing tool. And this is how you would usually do it. The subdivision already did some of my work for me, but usually you'd come in with the smoothing tool and you'd smooth that out to look a bit more natural. Also, a trick I like to do is I would affect the planes individually as they were. And since I've created, this is all from the one brushes and they all line up correctly, once I select, say, this corner and I sew, it'll do half the work for me. So now that's a way more natural looking shape than the original subdivision of the blocks we had originally. Let me make sure this is all sewn together. And of course, what I did is I simply used a waterfall model from Sawmill, was this one right here, I believe. I'm not sure why there's 3 different versions of the waterfall, but we create this model, we orient it correctly. This one's at more of a 45-degree angle, and we put it along here, and you can see we really want it to line up with the rocks, but it kind of goes inside the rock. That's no problem, because remember, displacements are malleable. We can just move this back a bit, and there you go. You know, maybe move these parts up on either side, so it really feels like the waterfall is streaming through just that one section. We can smooth it out a little bit. But now it feels like the water has slowly formed the cliff to follow its shape. And we even left a little bit of rock in there. You know, I'm not sure if I actually like that, so I'm going to go in again. And I'm just going to do that and get rid of it. So now the rock really just feels like it goes with the shape of the waterfall. Let me see if I can get it nice and snug in there. Perfect. Maybe come back here with a little bit of a top fix. Perfect. Sew everything back together. And there we go. A waterfall that meets down by the river. And of course now the river needs to meet a little better with the waterfall. I'm going to set my radius again to a higher amount. And just have it meet up right there. Perfect. And of course a quick little trick that most maps use is right where the waterfall model meets the river. We're going to go in and we're just going to find a rock model. I believe there's one that fits beautifully. One of these cliff walls here maybe. See how this fares. This one's a little large. Might be a bit too much. Going to the ground, maybe a bit higher up. Right, is looking good. Maybe we can even, and we're totally allowed to do this, go into the waterfall itself, the river itself, and make this come up a little bit. I'd say that's a bit too much, so we'll go down. But have some of the river just come up to meet the waterfall. Makes sense to me. And then hide it some more with a quick particle or two. So here I found the waterfall underscore bottom already perfectly made just for this scenario. Make sure that my particles are turned on. Maybe lift it up a little bit. And there you go. Looks almost perfect. Maybe we can even add in some lighting. And look at that. Almost perfect. Of course there's a shadow here, but that's just how it looks in the Hammer editor. If I were to open this up in Hammer, the light would go through to the bottom there, and it would look just perfect. Alright, now let's say this waterfall cliff isn't enough. Say we want a nice little archway that goes, let's say, along the riverbed. Or not along, that goes over the river. To do that, I'm going to make these columns here. Now I'm going to make this one a perfect square. You don't need to do this, but you'll see why I did that in a second. We have these squares. We can make them go as high as we want here. And we're going to have the actual arch column itself. But what we're going to do to make sure that all the edges meet up correctly is we're going to have these 45-degree meetups so that every edge is correctly oriented without stretching any column too much. Now again, the manual way to do this is you would just, only the faces you can see. So everything inside here, everything on this side, but on the inside, we aren't going to select these. Only what's visible, not the bottoms either. We're going to create a displacement. And the manual way to do this, and I do suggest that most people learn the manual way before they try anything else, is to go in with the displacement cube, have these 45-degree angles, and just tap right at the corners, right at the creases. Do it on the other side as well. Right at these creases, have them come out a bit. Oh, sorry. Maybe we can even increase the radius just a little bit so it really curves inward. And here, of course, we could just sew it as it is, but creates this nasty crease here. So I like to just select this side face maybe do a bit smaller of a radius, and using the raise lower, have it meet up as well as it can with this curve here. Oh, I kind of messed this one up a bit. Let me try to smooth that. Beautiful. See, any mistake you make can usually be solved with a simple smooth function or just a raise and lower. If you make a mistake, don't worry about it too much. You don't need to restart. So now I've kind of curved it in. I'm going to sew it again, and the arch is starting. But of course, I'm going to show you a quick shortcut. Say you don't want to do all that. Let's destroy these and then recreate them. You can go in, use the subdivide tool, and it does half the work for you. Now, this is a bit of a wacky looking arch. You know, it's a little too perfect. So that's when we come in again using our displacement block. Whoops. Maybe make a large radius, and we can shape this however we see fit. Maybe this part is a bit higher than this part. Maybe we can just add some noise, maybe a bit of a -20 and a +30. See what that does. It's a bit too rocky for my taste, but you get the idea. We can come in, do that face-by-face process I explained, where you just select the individual faces and change how they are oriented and then sew it back together. Now what I'm doing here is I'm making the bottom thicker than the top. As I explained earlier, that has a more stable look to it. And come back in, make sure that there's no seams. You can see we have a bit of an arch starting up. Now again, this is a little too smooth for my taste. You can go in with the noise tool. Let's do -5 and 15. Oh, I think that's almost perfect. Yeah, I really like how that looks. So we have a bit of an arch. Now some people really like to make the top of their arch skinnier. We can even do that just with the vertex tool. Now that is a very skinny arch right there. But the subdivision tool is a very strong tool, and I'll talk about that next, because it's a real shortcut to making the smoothest displacements you've ever seen. But of course, once you use the subdivision, you need to go back in with the manual displacement tool to make sure that it really is organic looking and not as if it were made perfectly by a robot, which is what it is. Now, I want to clarify. While all of the work that I just did was very much more decorative, the exact same ideas apply to gameplay displacements as well. All of these are also blocks that have just been moved and pulled around. You can kind of see how they've been pulled when you look around. See, this block here started flat, but the top got pulled out a little bit more. Displacement here was created by having a bridge that was then subdivided, or at least very expertly smoothed, right along its vertices to give it this kind of smooth, natural look. Same with these large brushes here. In Hammer, these are just blocks that meet up very well. You can see the seam right here. Don't tell anybody I showed you that. But he created this kind of spider web out of brushes, then went in, clicked a single button, just clicked on the subdivide button, and there you go. Natural looking terrain. Of course, he came back in and he made these, in some areas, have a lot more of a natural look. Not everywhere. Some places he left them quite smooth, but here you can see there's a bit of a bulb here that he kind of, maybe some noise work as well, just to make it feel and look more natural. We have another archway as well. Banana Bay is a terrific look at how displacements can be done in level. We can see a little bit of paint was done here to kind of give it a outcropping for a palm tree. Just really well done displacements all around. If I'm not wrong, these displacements here, just like Badlands, were just a flat plane that he slowly used the raise lower tool to bring further and further down into the sea. Alright, I've been holding it off long enough. I think it's time to finally talk about... Now, I will be fully honest, I am not the most technical person. So if you ask me how it works down to the science, I will not know. I just know how to use it moderately well. So say we have a dev rectangle, or a rectangular prism, as it were. If I were to take this rectangular prism and select only the side, so not the top or the bottom, turn that into a displacement, and then click the subdivide button, it will become a cylinder, or at least cylinder-like in the middle, but the further up it goes, it'll return to the original straight edges of the rectangle, or the square. Of course, the easiest way to make sure that doesn't happen is to put another displacement on the top and the bottom in the similar shape. And of course, when you subdivide this now, the tapering or the anti-tapering will happen on the two blocks that you created on either side, but the middle cylinder will be a cylinder. Of course, it's not exactly perfect. As we can see here, it's more of a quadratic cylinder, but it works well enough, especially in TF2, which has a smooth lighting effect that will make it look as smooth and cylindrical as possible. Now, this tapering can come in handy, and there's a trick done in a map that we all know, Capture the Flag Landfall. In this map, all of the large trees you see, those aren't models. Those are also displacements, simply using subdivision. So I don't have the correct wood texture from that map, but if we were to go in and do that same displacement on all edges effect, we can then quickly subdivide, and we have what almost looks like the stump of a tree. Now I can go in with a very small radius here, and using maybe a smaller radius distance, I can kind of create the roots as well. Just by alt-right clicking wherever I can, we can kind of have roots come out in every direction. Now this won't look perfect, but this really was as simple as it was for that map. Dr. Spud, the creator of Landfall, was really quite creative with this solution to custom trees without the models. And I would like to see a lot more maps that use this technique in their maps. Now, I didn't do this too perfectly. I mean, from this angle, it looks nice, I think. Here we go. A tree without any models, just using the subdivision. Again, making sure that there's displacements on either side when I subdivide this. We delete those, have this connect again, just sew it like this. It should sew it correctly. And there we go, the start of a tree. Of course, using the wrong textures, but using the subdivision, we've created something that you wouldn't be able to do in a million years using the brush tool. If you've worked with displacements enough manually, I think you are ready to go to the next step, which is quite literally just every time you create the brushes of a displaced area, just click that subdivide button, see what happens. You know, experiment a little bit, and you'll get some of the most beautiful organic structures you've ever dealt with. That being said, don't forget that the original brushes really need to be made correctly. As much as displacements give you a lot of freedom to move them around, it is quite smart to make sure that the edges line up like we have with this arch, or just in general, especially when it's inside the map itself, in the gameplay area. If you're working on ground or a wall, make sure that the brushes are the correct shape before you start working with the displacements. Just like all art, it's best to start by blocking out. Create the shapes of the terrain you want to create, and then, once the shapes are there, you can very easily go in with the smoothing tool and just smooth those areas up, make them look a little bit more natural. It saves you a ton of work to understand the vertex tool before you ever even touch the displacement tool. I'll give you a little under the hood look of a map that I've been working on here and there. And you can see how I've created these brushes, making sure that they are all four-sided brushes. But I've created the ramps, I've created these little bridges. And sure, once I'm content with how this looks, I can come in and I can very easily turn these into displacements at any time and just subdivide and get these really nice looking smoothed out terrain that I then just mess around with. But it's very important to first have the shape of your map before turning it into natural terrain. Alright, one last little lesson I'll do before I'm gone is the subdivided roads that I did in King of the Hill Oilchange. And these are a lot easier to do than you'd think. But they come down to really making sure that everything stays proportional. So you see, I've created these brushes, and I've tried my best to maintain the width of this road as it goes down the street, so to speak, so that the texture stays the same size, stays in the middle, and that nothing gets whack out of bat. And once I could do this, I created a question mark as well to see how far I could get the curve, because remember, these brushes on the side have to stay with 4 vertexes. They can't become triangles. So this was the steepest curve that I could do. And here I saw how changing the height would affect the road. And here I created, this was kind of what I had in Oilchange, where it's a constant incline or downcline, whichever one you want to say. And for this, of course, you can't have the road turn and go down at the same time. Here it really got close to becoming a triangle. And so I would have it go down at a ramp and then have a little section where it turns 45 degrees and is completely flat. And then it will go down again, flatten out and turn and go down again. Now, very simple. Once I go in with my displacement tool and I select everything here and I press the subdivide button, you get the most smooth road you could ever imagine. This doesn't just have to be roads, you could do pathways as well. Let's try it here for the actual bend, the actual question mark curve. Bam. Let's do that again. Bam. All of the angles completely curve out, they completely smooth out, and we got this perfect turn. Let's try it for this section with the up and down. Create, and bam. Not only is the turn here smooth, but the subdivision actually made the uphill round as well. It gave it more of a hill. Of course, we can see where the subdivision kind of peaks out at the corner here, but on the road, it is a perfect curve. Now let's see how I did it for the Oilchange itself. All right, we're gonna create, and bam. As you can see, it turns and goes uphill as smooth as it can be. Of course, if you really take a good look, you can kind of see where the straight flat parts would have been originally, but for all intents and purposes, that is a smooth little road right here, and this truck can keep going. No potholes and no bumps for him to get stuck on. Alright, thank you for watching the Displacement Part 2 video. Sorry this one took so long to get out. I got sick right between Part 1 and Part 2. Lost my voice. Couldn't do much there. But I hope everybody who sees this video goes out there, tries experimenting with some new tools with the displacements. And yeah, go make some nature! Go make some maps! Yeah!